This audio file is a collection made of the summaries of selected articles on Suzan-Lori Parks' Topdog, Underdog. The recordings were made by master's degree students of English literature at Alzahra University for the contemporary drama class of spring 2021.
The article that I read is called The Money Shot: Economics of Sex, Guns and Language in Topdog Underdog by Micah Tucker Abramson, which was published in the Journal of Modern Drama in 2007. The article's main focus is on the relationship of the two black brothers and the larger issues of economics, race, and masculinity. The article explores the play with an eye on the principles of economy to see how they affect constructs of masculinity. And it says that if masculinity is based on the amount of money a man can earn and also his ability to support a family, the poor economic conditions of a society makes the notion of masculinity difficult to maintain. And then it continues to explain that by locating the drama in a one-bedroom apartment and focusing on only two characters, Parks forces us to confront the vast issues of economic and racial inequalities in America through their impacts on the psyches of the characters. Parks suggests that for a black man in a racist and classist society, the psychological and the social are tightly linked, and a black man's assessment of his worth depends on his ability to identify with the symbol of recognition, which is money. And in this regard, we can say that the play gives us a powerful representation of the American deindustrialization through Lincoln's job first as a three-card Monte player, and then his employment in a mall, and finally his subsequent layoff due to cheaper mechanical labor. And also we can see this through Booth's attempt to move from petty thieving to card hustling. And this is something that affects their personality and masculinity, since they can't earn enough money, and the fact that they're black makes things even harder for them. And the last thing that the article talks about is the concept of language. It says that the role of language in the play is connected to the idea of trauma, which can be easily read as history in this context. And we know that the characters of the play suffer from traumatic experiences from their childhood and also the traumas they experienced during their adulthood. And in the play, we see that the language of the brothers masks their trauma or history, but at the same time, it's the reader's only access to the trauma. But in some parts, the language becomes very revealing, though it remains somehow limited. Another point about the language, which is important to know, is the repetition and revision that takes place in the play. And it again indicates the presence of trauma and how trauma repeats itself and how the characters prefer to keep things hidden.
Hello, the article that I'm going to talk about today is titled Postmodern Aesthetics and Post-Industrial Economics, Games of Empire in Suzan-Lori Parks' Topdog, Underdog. It was written by Jochen Achilles and was published by the South Atlantic Modern Language Association in the Journal of South Atlantic Review in 2010. It is also available on JSTOR. Now, this paper predominantly argues that this play contains a bunch of postmodern features that display themselves through the oscillations between ethnicity and universality, mimesis and simulation, commodification, and elementary human desires, suggesting that Parks's drama demonstrates by its structural layout the existence of a universe that tends to blur the lines drawn between virtuality and reality as an attempt to become universal. It further speaks of the main interactions that occur between the two brothers, Booth and Lincoln, which created drama within the original drama, which causes the birth of a meta-drama in turn. Now, these interactions are actually Booth's anti-capitalistic behaviors against the background of his traumatic childhood, the Lincoln shooting, and the three-card con that I am going to talk about. Interestingly, all three scenarios are motivated by and linked with money transactions in the pursuit of either symbolic or tangible capital. We have Booth's troubled relationship with his girlfriend Grace that is actually based on the framework of prestige and the power that is based on money. We have the Lincoln Act, which relies on people's eagerness to release their aggressive impulses for which they are actually willing to pay. And we have the three-card con, which obviously cashes in on the general greed for money. Both brothers try to make sense of the situation that they are in equally idiosyncratic ways. Booth remains devoted to the intactness of the family of his childhood and, as a result, refuses to work and earn money. He prefers to steal because he believes that excessive work and consumerism was something that actually destroyed his parents' marriage. By contrast, we have Lincoln, who is not worried at all about his family's past. He is actually willing to slip into any kind of promise of money, even if it actually risks the destruction of his identity. He's eager to spend money as soon as he earns it. Then we have the issue of inheritance and brotherhood. For Booth, the silk stocking full of the money that his mother has actually left him as an inheritance is not only a container of money, but the embodiment of the mother's ambivalent mystery. She has actually made a precious gift to him and obviously expressed her appreciation for her son through this act, but at the same time she abandoned him forever. And this contradiction actually explains Booth's hold on this stocking, which he keeps intact over the years. He has a very strong emotional reliance on Lincoln as well, and he considers him to be the only person that he wants to share anything with. And this speaks of the trauma that he is going through. On the other hand, we have Lincoln, who considers the family as an arrangement that can be reproduced at will with a lot of different participants. But Booth cannot hear such randomness, and he believes that if he cannot have his parents back, he should team up with Lincoln and return to the lost familial harmony of his childhood. Then we have the issue of the three-card game, which is of great importance. Lincoln is actually unable to grasp that for Booth, this con is actually a way of redefining his relationship to his brother in continuation of their childhood solidarity. He actually describes the three-card game as being predetermined by the dealer and makes Booth understand that the underdog is always underdog right from the beginning and that the dealer will always be the top dog. In Lincoln's interpretation of the game, Booth will always remain inferior, and in this case, the father's naming of the brothers as Booth and Lincoln is not a joke at all, and it is actually a statement of unmovable hierarchies. So it could even be said that their names and what they do is an American social allegory, after all. Now, I found this article very interesting, for it tended to the matter of human needs and how far humans can go with them. And personally, the scenes with Booth and Lincoln talking about sexual matters and their parents' affairs reminded me of Marina Abramovich's exhibition Rhythm Zero. As a master of conceptual art, Marina Abramovich remained still in a place where people could literally do anything to her with the available objects on a desk, including a shotgun. And at first, the visitors went easy on her, but soon their animalistic desires displayed themselves and they attempted to scratch her skin and even suck her blood. Later, she exclaimed that her hair had grown white overnight after the exhibition terminated. I revisited the same unjust power struggles in this play as the brothers tried to gain the upper hand dialogue after dialogue, and this power struggle displays itself at times in the form of voyeurism, which further reveals and alarms the situation that the brothers are at.
The article that I read for this session's play is titled Between the Imaginary and the Real, Exploring Duality in Suzan-Lori Parks Topdog, Underdog. It was written by Kofi Eugene and it was published in the International Journal of Education and Research. The article's main focus is on the exterior and interior self of Lincoln and Booth. It talks about the fact that Booth differs from Lincoln in the sense that while Lincoln is conscious of his dual personality, Booth seems to be oblivious of a private self different from his public self. It goes on to relate this idea to the inheritance money that Booth is saving for himself and suggests that Booth does not spend the money his mother left him in order to symbolically maintain his maternal connection. In taking that symbol of Booth's sustenance, which constitutes a rock on which he stands and has always stood, Lincoln undermines or destroys metaphorically his brother's world of illusion and his fascination of his mother's gift. Without the symbol of his attachment to his mother, Booth becomes disenchanted. His visions become hollow and meaningless. Therefore, dispossessing Booth of this symbol amounts to the destitution of Booth's imaginary world, his self-invented personality, which occurs as a short circuit to his male status and projects him into reality. For Booth, the money in the stocking is a symbol with imaginary and real support. It is Booth's symptom, and when Lincoln attempts to cut open the money, he threatens the symptoms by threatening to collapse the tension between the imaginary and the real. I personally think that this is an interesting idea and an interesting approach to the play. And I believe that by holding on so vainly to that inheritance, Booth is holding tight a past that does not exist any longer, and he is trying to maintain some part of his life that is long gone. We see that he's obsessed with this inheritance, but doesn't do anything with it. It just acts as a kind of a link between these two sides of his life and of his personality.
Hello everyone. The article I studied today is The Pursuit of Happiness, the State of the American Dream in Suzan-Lori Parks Topdog, Underdog. It's written by Sabrina Abbott and is published in Scholar Works at Georgia State University in 2012. And I will study the fourth chapter of this thesis titled Family. This chapter mainly argues the question of the American dream and its impact on a private and deep personal levels, such as the case in Booth and Lincoln's between the family members. And it also questions the validity of institutions that enable that dream and whether it is accessible for all races. And in order to study the relationship between these two brothers, she refers to the writings of Slavoj Žižek, and she explains that, like the relationship between the worker and employer, the two brothers attempt in a relationship that is mediated by money, and the exchange of money from the older to the younger serves to maintain a harmonious balance in their relationship. And as it is stated, according to Žižek, disturbing this exchange for the sake of overturning the
hierarchical power structure would result in failure, and as the story you can see how it ends tragically. And overall, what she attempts to increase is the awareness of the impact of these social institutions on consciousness, and warns her audience of the consequences of allowing money to dominate the way we perceive the social and culturally man-made institutions. By examining this and the nature of these two troubled brothers relationship and their visions of the American dream, she challenges her audience to reflect on who are excluded from the dream and why they are excluded. And Booth and Lincoln's circumstances and inability to achieve this dream may come from the dream's unstated racial exclusion of Black Americans. And in effect, we can conclude that these brothers pursue what is not possible for them. And in my view, this article as a whole reveals how devastating can be that not obtaining that American dream can be, and how it destroys their sole position and which is their relationship. And I think the fight for the social and economic equality is the core struggle that this article is trying to depict.
Hi everyone. The article that I read is called What Is and What Ain't Top Dog, Underdog in the American Hustle. It was written by Patrick Mailey in 2013 and published in the Modern Drama Journal. The author of the article argues that on the surface, this is a play that seems to be about the relationship between two brothers who support each other, and they're trying to survive and get by in a hostile environment. And although they have different like ways of trying to survive, but they have a common goal and they want to help each other, not just to survive, but also maybe to get ahead in this social atmosphere. But this reading of the play, the author argues, is a very shallow or maybe a surface reading of the play that believes the play to be a realist play, but Parks is not a realist author, the writer argues, or that, to put it better, Parks's realism isn't one that shows only on the surface. The writer of this article argues that, just like with Pinter, realism in Parks's plays is only a thin layer. It's only the surface. And if we go beyond that surface, we can see that Parks actually is trying to destabilize realist assumptions in order to offer a critique of both the American society and American drama. And on the surface, we see that Top Dog Underdog gives us two brothers who are joined together in their struggle to survive. But if we go beyond that, we see that these two brothers, they are not joined together at all. And although they're trying to survive, but we see that there is this binary opposition of Top Dog Underdog between them. And Lincoln is trying to get ahead by maybe trying to deceive his own brother into believing that he's good enough. So the brothers, above everything else, are interested in their own survival. So the writer of the article argues that this is a critique of individualism, a critique of individualist competition, that
we have this idea of race and we have this idea of family that is supposed to be a common figure between these two brothers that's supposed to bring them together, give them something in common, give them something that they can both hold on to. But all of those ideas, they're not there anymore in this play. The only thing that's there is this individual desire to get by, this idea of competition that we can see
This
between the two
idea
brothers. Manifests itself in the game that Lincoln and Booth are playing, and the tricks that Lincoln plays. For example, we have the Mexican turnover, which is a card trick that Lincoln uses. Basically, even if Booth tries to guess the correct card, what Lincoln does is that he performs a card trick, and he performs it so fast that Booth doesn't even see it happening, but he switches the card. So even if Booth does guess the correct card, Lincoln has a way of changing the cards and making Booth lose. It's like there is no winning. Of the play, the way it's played, the tricks that are used in it are like a metaphor for the way society works, for the way race and family are no longer things that bring people together. The only thing that matters is this individualism, this competitive individualism, every man for himself. Personally, I really enjoyed reading this article, and I think that there were a lot of interesting points that the author made. I hope we can talk about them in the class. And I think this idea of this game representing the American society and representing Parks' critique of the American society works very well, because it's like tiny version of the American dream, I think, that Lincoln is giving Booth the idea, this illusion that he can get by, that he can be successful in this game, that he can prosper. But the truth is, he knows that there is no winning. Lincoln himself knows that there is no winning, because he has this dirty trick, the Mexican turnover, and no matter how Booth tries, how much he tries, he can't win. This idea that the people on top, they will help the people on the bottom get by, to climb the ladder. I mean, they make them think that they're going to do that, but the truth is that they have ways of making sure that this binary opposition of top and under never goes away, because if it does go away, then the people at top are no different from the people at the bottom. And this, I think, is the essence of the American dream. Makes you think that you can be successful, but it doesn't give you the means to be successful.
Hi everyone, the article I read for this week's play is titled The Theater of Hustle and the Hustle of Theater, Play, Player, and Played in Suzan-Lori Parks' Topdog, Underdog, written by Michel Lemieux, published in African American Reviews, 45th volume in 2012. The article is available on JSTOR. The article pays close attention to the application of hustle in Topdog, Underdog, and how the play places in the naturalistic versus metatheatrical discourse. So Parks's previous works have all been more obviously metatheatrical, with commentary of the performity of identity and the theatricality of history. However, the linear action and realistic dialogues in Topdog have led many critics to see the play as a diversion of Parks's idiosyncratic style and a play with traditional naturalistic structure. The play's conditions of family dysfunction, urban poverty, and social oppression further prove their observation. Italo Calvino considered metatheatrical processes such as a play within a play as standing in opposition to the realist attempt to make the audience forget that what they are witnessing is a construction of language and fiction, and what he called the strategy of effects. Now, the strategy of effects in Topdog is the trope of the hustle. There are three different hustles in the play. One, that Lincoln cons his brother out of his inheritance. Two, Booth's gullibility, as per this article's theory. And the third is the hustle Parks pulls on her audience. Parks has staged a play that achieves its effect by prompting the audience to look for something hidden only to distract them from and then ultimately remind them of what lies in plain sight, that Booth shoots Lincoln dead. Despite the fact that through dialogue and actions, the event of Booth shooting Lincoln is both discussed and theatrically performed, the naturalistic tactics of the play distract from the meta-theatrical strategy that she has set into action in her play. In this way, Parks demonstrates Calvinist theory that realism is a hustle to distract the reader from the performance put on by language, by a sleight of hands that distracts the viewer from the fact that they have already been told how the play will end. Topdog also most obviously explores matters of identity, performativity, and history as Parks introduces themes of the fake, the phony, or the imposter in the play. It also both experiments with dramatic forms and performs American and African American history as well. Parks presents the problem of distinguishing the real thing from the echo throughout the play in multiple guises, from the ring that looks almost the same as the real thing to Lincoln's job as an Abraham Lincoln imposter, and the new clothes that lead him to reflect on the relationship between exterior appearance and interior identity. Through Lincoln's character, we see a lot of personal struggle with authenticity and identity. Lincoln persists on his job being an honest work and not a hustle, despite the fact that it's, by definition, a fake recreation of a real event, as this plays into his anxieties about his own identity, whether he is the real thing or an imposter as he is in his work. Parks constantly challenges the concept of authentic versus performative self throughout the play through the character of Lincoln. For instance, on multiple occasions throughout the play, Lincoln comes across as the more submissive and weaker brother, like how he pays for everything but is treated as Booth's charity case. Or when choosing their dinner, he easily gives in to his brother's demand to eat what he had apparently not asked for before. But as Lincoln himself later explains about the dealer when explaining the three-card scam, the man must first feign reluctance in order to make the mark more eager for the play. From this perspective, Lincoln's performance as the sacrificing older brother can be questioned, and his actions can be seen as a form of reverse psychology with hidden motives. Coming back to the new clothes, Lincoln talks his brother into exchanging ties by making the exchange seem entirely for the benefit of Booth. But his reaction to his real self in these new clothes reveal how he used his brother's self-interest to his own benefit. A similar interpretation is possible for the dinner affair as well. For Lincoln's authentic self, it seems, is the hustler who plays other people. On the other side is the naive character of Booth, who is seen as the underdog and the trick mark by most interpretations, and who has been dismissed as the weakness of the play by many critics. But this article argues that Booth's gullibility and his inability to see through the hustle is also a hustle that he pulls. After all, when the play ends, he is the one left with the money and alive, while Lincoln is dead. The author of the article brings examples of how throughout the play Booth keeps on practicing the three-card Monte scam, but seems to get worse as the play goes on. Or the fact that his role as the sideline in their practice game of three-card was in fact for him to sell the idea of the possibility of winning the game. So the fact that he enthusiastically goes about his small win is in fact exactly what he must do as the sideline. But what I thought was the most interesting evidence brought up in this article is the identity of Lincoln's best customer, the quote brother unquote, who plays the character of Booth and shoots Lincoln. The two brothers discuss the anonymous person who might be a brother, as in a black man, but the question can also be read as being an actual brother, as in the Booth in the story. The idea that the customer is in fact Booth and that he has prepared to shoot Lincoln the entire time can be deduced in multiple instances of the play, like how he was in fact trying to get Lincoln fired by making his performance like the real thing, or that he mimics shooting Lincoln and even warns him on a meta-theatrical level that, quote, I am Booth, unquote, that he will kill him eventually. The philosophical line that the customer had once whispered to Link, quote, you're only yourself when no one's watching, unquote, can also be another hint on the performative identity of both Booth and Lincoln. So the complexity of Parks's play emerges in its refusal to be reduced to either exclusively naturalistics or meta-theatrical readings. I would finish this with a quote from the article. If to perform is also to con, as in Lincoln's impersonation of Lincoln or in Booth's of Booth, or in any piece of theater, then a meta-theatrical play is one that presents itself as a hustle. At the end of the day, the man won't want you picking right. The man presents a manipulative dealer, an unforgiving society, and a history of racial inequality that goes all the way back to slavery and continues into the present. So the right way to read the entire play is to see it both as naturalistic and meta-theatrical. Overall, I really like this article. It helped me to kind of give more substance to the play. I especially like the idea of Booth as pulling his own hustle because like many of the people who were mentioned in this article, I didn't see him as anything particularly tricking, and I thought he was a sort of symbol of idealism, which doesn't fit well into the idea of hustle and the con that is shown in the play, and therefore the fact that he breaks by the end was a result of that. But I think it was really convincing to think of him as a hustler of his own.
Hi everyone. I will be talking about Who's the Man? Historical melodrama and the performance of masculinity in Topdog, Underdog by Jason Bush. This article is included in Suzan-Lori Parks, a case book, published by Routledge 2007. This article focuses on how each of the two brothers in the play performs his gender. It highlights the importance of role-playing in a struggle for dominance. Bush mainly describes how performances of socially defined roles and identities and the emergent genre of black masculinity known as hustling are intertwined with a history of American national narratives, and argues that this intertwining of subcultural and hegemonic performative discourses inevitably leads into violence. The play makes this struggle for power clear from the beginning when we see the setting of the play. In the brothers' apartment, there is only one of each furniture, which makes it clear that there is only room for one dominant figure. Every detail that is gradually added to the plot reinforces the sense of struggle. The characters who are brought up in conversations, like Lincoln's former crew members or Grace, have no real relationship to either brother except for the imaginings of each respective character as a means of establishing dominance within this fraternal relationship. Bush also brings up the topic of hustling as a subcultural form of resistance that African American males adopt in order to establish themselves as patriarchs in the capitalist American society, which does not allow them to have access to resources. The icon of the hustler represents, quote, not only an alternative economic form, but an alternative form of masculinity, unquote. So in the hustling culture, illegitimate forms of making money and capitalistic gain are flaunted as sources of pride and anti-authoritarianism. Booth romanticizes his brother's former life as a hustler and is fond of that kind of image of masculinity. Booth constantly tries to emasculate Lincoln's present life. In his speech, he makes a connection between Lincoln's impotence and his white-facing, which represents bowing to the establishment and lack of authority. Booth's definition of masculinity derives from his memories of his father and is defined by boozing, womanizing, and having nice clothes. On the other hand, Lincoln also desires the status of his former life, while he has actually shifted from his iconic performance as a hustler to a more legitimate role as a breadwinner with a respectable job. Of course, that doesn't last very long. The question that this article tries to answer at last is the relationship that these performances of masculinity have with the history of American national narratives. In other words, the relationship between Lincoln and Booth and the historical Lincoln and Booth. One explanation for this could be related to Booth as the underdog, like John Wilkes Booth, standing up to the authority of an overarching patriarchal figure. The writer of the article, however, focuses on another explanation, which is the melodramatic role of Abraham Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth in American national mythology. There is a certain fantastical obsession with events like the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Booth in American society, and Parks addresses this with presentation of the carnival game of shooting Lincoln. The writer of the article believes that there is a parallel between the melodramatic outsider image that people today have about such historical figures and the way the images of the gangster in the black popular culture is seen, which itself has become quite popular with the mainstream American audience and has lost its anti-authoritarian meaning. I personally really like this article. While reading the play, something that I found very interesting and also kind of bizarre was Lincoln's job, the fact that he's paid to play the role of Abraham Lincoln so that people can shoot him. So I found this article's interpretation of that to be quite interesting.
The article that I read for the play is called Family Acts, History, Memory, and Performance in Suzan-Lori Parks' The America Play and Topdog, Underdog. It was published in South Atlantic Review in 2009 and it's written by Laura Dawkins. I downloaded it from bbooks.asia.com. Both of Parks' plays, The America Play and Topdog, Underdog, has that symbolic figure of a black Abraham Lincoln impersonator. He is repeatedly shot by customers firing blanks in an enactment of Booth's murder of the president. Both of the plays scrutinizes American history as mortal wound and theatrical performance. Critics believe that Parks used the figure of the black Lincoln impersonator because she wanted to draw attention to the illusion of an African American presence in mainstream American history. Some critics believe that Parks likes to use a certain phrase or element again and again, each time slightly revised. So we can say that the Black Lincoln impersonator in Top Dog Underdog is kind of a revision of her earlier version in the America play. The Black Abraham Lincoln impersonator in Top Dog Underdog illustrates how the black man's adoption of fabricated masculine identities alienates him from the African American heritage. In both of the plays, Parks gestures toward the notion of an authentic black past. Because this past is traumatic, using performance is a way of self-protection. Parks uses performance in the plays to demonstrate how individuals act out a past whose way is unbearable. In the America play, the view of the African American family is hopeful, but in Top Dog Underdog, it's a bleak, disturbing vision of familial disruption and devastation. The play anatomizes the social and psychological conflicts that precipitate fratricide, when Booth replicates the infamous act of his historical counterpart and kills his brother. The author of the article suggests that Parks' characters have lost the African American ideal of brotherhood because they assimilated into a hierarchical American society, which is a society based upon capitalistic rather than communal values. Because in Top Dog, Underdog, we can see that the African American communal ideas are being endangered within American culture because it has the ethos of competitive individualism in it. Because Lincoln and Booth are alienated from their ancestral heritage, they internalize this American ethos and um, they take a combative role toward each other and toward their black brothers and sisters. In assuming the roles of competitors with each other, Lincoln and Booth enact a Western Oedipal model of male psychological development. Lincoln and Booth adopt exaggerated masculine poses to resist their marginal status and assert their ability to compete within a success-oriented national culture. Lincoln shields himself behind performance. He hides um, from reality with his performance, and he's unable to form a meaningful relation to his personal or historical past. The two brothers have different reactions to their past. For example, Lincoln banishes recollections of his childhood experience, and he effaces the past by burning his father's clothes, and he immediately spends the inheritance that his father left him. But on the other hand, Booth shirks confrontations with his parents' abandonment, not by attempting to obliterate childhood memories, as Lincoln does, but by sentimentalizing the past. He clings to the family album which mends through photographic representation. They split domestic unit and he refuses to spend or relinquish the inheritance. This part was quoted from page 95. So the two brothers have two different reactions to the trauma that they experienced. The article was interesting and I completely agreed with it. I thought that it completely covered the issue of linking the Lincoln and Booth problems with their history and with their African American heritage, and it talked about the traumas that they experienced, and I liked it and I agreed with it.
The chapter that I'm going to explain is the third chapter of a book called African American Culture and Society after Rowdy King. I found this book on JSTOR and found it relatable to the plays by Parks. So the chapter is titled Of Digging and Faking, Historiopoiesis in Suzan-Lori Parks and Contemporary African American Culture by Ika Saul. So the author opens the chapter by a quotation of Parks. She says that I take issues with the history because there isn't enough of it and it doesn't serve me. So the author believes that the history does not serve her because it is told from a Western point of view, and we have philosophers like Hegel who believe that African history has been a kind of repetitive history and it does not show any kind of progress. Therefore, there is no real authentic history for African Americans. Authors like Fred D. Aguirre say that every generation needs a new kind of history. So we have African American authors during 70s and 80s starting to write realistic and super realistic and symbolic literature about the slavery, because at that point they have they have been putting some kind of distance between themselves and the reality of slavery. Therefore, they were able to reinvent their own history. But authors like Parks, they are born and raised during the 90s, so they have experienced some different kind of history. And the author says that he has chosen Parks because her plays are rich in poetic techniques, and she is acclaimed as a dramatist who has won several academic awards and several awards in nationalist ceremonies. So, historiography is defined as making the history. Her characters dig the past up. Sometimes they are literally digging something up on the stage, like her first play, Sinner's Place. And we have another play by her, America play. And in this play, we have some characters who are black, and the character of Brazil is not allowed to take part in the actual history of founding fathers during the American history. Therefore, he decides to dig a big hole of history that is an ironic take on the big hole of history. And we have also another play by her. It is called Getting Mother's Body. In this play, we have a Negro reconstructionist, and he is digging body parts of their own mother. So a whole family actually is engaged in this practice. And in the play Topdog, Underdog, we have two brothers, and they are seeking their inheritance, and they are discussing about their own position of the things that are left to them by their parents, and they are trying to patch up their own narrative in order to make sense of what has happened to them. Sometimes they partially succeed in doing so because, for example, in the play Getting Mother's Body, and the character actually succeeds in taking some parts of their mother's body back. But in most of the plays, they are just trapped in reenacting their own past. We have the character of Abraham Lincoln, and he is represented in several of the plays. And here the author says that here we have the theory of mimicking by Homi Bhabha. It is totally applicable because these black characters are mimicking the character that is supposed to be their white savior, and they are, in doing so, they are reestablishing him as a superior discourse, but they are also criticizing it in several ways, and they are changing it, and they just change the color of his outfit and other characteristics of the Abraham Lincoln. And in the end, the author argues that her engagement with slavery, Parks' engagement, is post-memory. Post-memory is where imaginative investment, projection, and creation can take place. It is something that is exclusive for those authors who are born after 1990s, and they have experienced something called desegregation. It is something that Martin Luther King has dreamt of. They want to reinvent their own identities, and they are called post-black because authors like Spillers believe that slavery is the privileged narrative in black identity, and it shouldn't be so because dramatists like Parks believe that we do not need the violence of clans or slavery in order to have black lives that are worthy of dramatic display.